Get Rich Education is brought to you by International Coffee Farms. Own your very own parcel of a Panama coffee farm today.
Welcome to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold, giving you information and ideas on the investment that has turned more ordinary people into millionaires and billionaires than anything else, and can provide you with more wealth and happiness than you ever thought possible. Now, here's your host, investor, entrepreneur, business owner, and educator, Keith Weinhold.
You're listening to Get Rich Education, episode 36. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. All I'm doing here on this show is saying the things that you've already been thinking but didn't know how to say, and in fact, you haven't been thinking about them for a while. I've got you thinking about them again because you really hadn't been thinking these same aspirational thoughts that you had since you were younger. You know, I've had a pretty interesting investing week, and I've got a lot planned for you today. A blogger has called me the anti-Dave Ramsey, and then I've got some operations and problems to tell you about at an 8-plex apartment building that I own, which I know you'll get some real estate investing takeaways from. Yeah, there's a blogger out there referring to me as the anti-Dave Ramsey, and you know, I kind of love it. Yeah. From an investment standpoint, it's absolutely true. You know, from that perspective, you could call me the anti-Dave Ramsey. But, you know, really one word I think of that comes to mind pretty quickly when I think about Dave Ramsey, you know, it is admiration. You know, I do have to say, he's principled. He's a righteous dude. You know, few things matter more than character. He's smart too. He thinks on his feet pretty fast. All right, Dave, being the well-known, longtime syndicated talk show host that he is a real estate investor, and he's known for having the unusual to me, position of having his properties paid off with no mortgage on them. I mean, to me, that's equity exposed to the market, no leverage return, not exploiting the arbitrage, the delta between the cap rate and the mortgage interest rate, even as mortgage interest rates still hover at historic lows. Turning one's back on all of those benefits just to say that you're debt-free? I mean, debt-free doesn't mean that you can stop working. It says nothing about your passive income or any income at all, for that matter of fact. I don't want to be debt-free. You know, at GRE, I tell you about how to be financially free. It's a lot more powerful than being debt-free. Now, sometimes a seller might need to really sell a property quickly because they need cash right away. Okay, imagine that scenario. In that scenario, they'd be willing to give you a really good deal on a property in order to get the cash from you really quickly. Well, in that case, it might make sense for you to pay all cash for a property because if you have to wait for a loan to close, that seller will then sell that good deal to someone else that can pay cash. But a few months after you buy that property debt-free, you probably don't want to stay in that debt-free position, so consider getting a loan for leverage then. All right, so you might pay all cash to get in, and then you can leverage out in that scenario. All right, I'm getting a little bit worn out with those debt-free screams though, okay? GRE plays to win rather than playing not to lose. You probably want good debt. Yeah, it's very good debt when you've outsourced the debt payments to your tenants because in a sense, if that rent income is durable, then it's not really your debt. The tenants make the debt payments for you, and on top of that, pay you monthly cash flow. At the same time, you receive any appreciation on the entire building. Even though you only put down a fraction of the building's value in the form of a down payment, you get any and all appreciation and any and all tax benefits on the entire building. That's why I want debt. You know what? I have millions of dollars in debt. Yes, I do have millions of dollars in debt. And you know, there is a problem with that, I admit. The problem is that I want tens of millions of dollars in debt, and I don't have that yet, okay? And hey, I have the ability to pay off all my debt anytime I want. Give it a little cushion, it will probably take 60 days for me to sell enough properties to retire all my debt. Maybe even call it 90 days to be safe. But that would be one of the most reckless things I could ever do, because retiring my debt means making my money retire on me rather than work for me. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I explain all this in episode 6, which is still one of the most popular GRE episodes ever. The thousands and thousands of downloads for episode 6, why you want to be financially free and not debt-free, has just blown me away. So I help you build your compelling why for real estate investing. All right, a little perspective here. All right, back in 2013, the S&P 500 index rose 30%. It shot up 30% in that year. Well, you know what? If that happened every year, well, then I probably would be a big stock investor. But that doesn't happen. Over the last 25 years, the S&P's per annum gain is 9 to 10%, which is really only a 4 to 5% return on an inflation-adjusted basis. Not the low inflation rate on the government-reported CPI, but the real rate of inflation that hits you in the pocket with food and energy added in. What if you had a return of closer to 30% compounding every year? Well, with real estate, I expect returns more like that. All right, but today I came to give you some perspective. Lately, I had some problems at an eightplex building that I own, and that got me thinking about both the operation of that building now and a problem I had when I purchased it. And I just think you're going to get some takeaways from hearing me and kind of how I think about my eightplex building. So I think you'll get some real perspective today. Now, I usually stop by my local apartment buildings about every 2 months. I walk the grounds, and then I go indoors and walk the common areas of them, just to see that my professional manager is on top of things, and he typically is. He's pretty good. But I hadn't stopped at my eightplex building over toward Midtown in probably 4 to 5 months. It's only 15 minutes away from my home, but it's just not the kind of place I would drive past unless I went there intentionally. Now, we'll get into my recent problem there later in the show, but first, let's back up and tell you why I wanted this particular eightplex in the first place, and about some significant problems I had in both buying the building, and then later I'll tell you about the operational challenge since. All right, so I bought this eightplex building a little over 2 years ago, and the seller's bottom line on what he would accept for the building was $735,000. All right, so knowing me, and this is what I typically do, $735 was his bottom line. I offered $760, and that he covered $25,000 in my closing costs. Okay, that still nets him $735K, and see, that way it's less out of pocket for me, and it increases my cash-on-cash return. Now, I put a 20% down payment on that eightplex, and I got loan terms of a 5.25% interest rate fixed for 10 years. It's a 10-year balloon over a 30-year amortization. So those are pretty sweet loan terms for a multifamily property, okay? Now, buying this one was kind of stressful, and there can be some tension around really most any real estate deal from the time that you want to write an offer on a place and that that you found a good one, until it closes at the title company and you get confirmation of recording the next day. There's some tension, but this particular deal had more tension than most because it was part of a 1031 tax-deferred exchange. And if I don't meet these progress milestones within certain timelines, I have to pay a hefty capital gains tax and depreciation recapture on the gain from the building that I sold in order to get the equity for the purchase of this eightplex. Now, remember, of course, I wouldn't actually use my money for the $152,000 down payment it took. That's 20% of the purchase price. I don't use my money. I use other people's money, the bank's, which was leveraged from a fourplex building that I had sold in order to get that $152K of equity. I want to do these exchanges into bigger buildings because it nets me more cash flow every time. And in this case, I'm keeping the equity in the Anchorage market, my home market, because there's a housing shortage, and that shortage is projected to continue over the next 5 to 10 years. Now, I thought that this 8-plex was a worthy purchase at the time because, for one thing, it had $9,400 of monthly rent income over all of the units. So at a purchase price of $760K, that's a rent-to-value ratio, or RV ratio, of 1.24%. Okay, 1 month's rent divided by the purchase price of the building, and anything over 1% usually provides cash flow with today's interest rates. And all 8 units are 2-bed, 1-bath, by the way. This 8-plex actually had 9 rent incomes because there are 8 residential units where families live, plus there's a 1-car garage in that same building, and that was being rented to a 9th lease payer that lived off-site, okay? So he pays $400 a month for the heated garage. All that added up to $9,400, and that looked pretty good. And by the way, that's the way you want to do it most every time. If you have a garage at a property, whether it's attached or detached, you will almost always get more income for it if you rent it to a tenant that lives off-site. Okay, at most multifamily buildings, the tenants that live on-site, they just really aren't of the demographic that has the income to pay a premium to park their car in there, okay? An on-site tenant would maybe only pay me an extra $100 a month for the garage, but an off-site tenant pays $400, okay? They probably have a better income. So that RV ratio, 1.24%, that's just a starting point, okay? There's a number of factors to consider around that. For one thing, I had to pay both the heating bill for the entire building and the electric bill for the entire building. Being a 1964 build, both of those utilities were master metered. They weren't individually metered to each unit. You tend to see that more often in these older buildings, okay? So that's kind of a negative adjustment on that 1.24% RV ratio. But that meant I could charge that higher $9,400 rent because, now I can advertise the units, all utilities included, which has a certain attraction to tenants. But again, that's already built into the quick and dirty calculated RV. Now, some other things to consider after that RV ratio, which is just a guide, is the fact that this property's drinking water source is on a well. All right, so it's a little odd, even though this building is pretty close to Midtown Anchorage, a city of 300,000 residents. Yeah, it's on a well rather than being hooked up to municipal drinking water. So that means I wouldn't have to pay any water bill as long as I owned the building, and that would be several $100s a month I wouldn't have to spend, enhancing my cash flow by maybe $300 or $400 a month. So that's a positive, a nice tailwind on that RV ratio. But here comes another negative, okay? This 8-plex, probably around an 8,000 square foot building, it rests on this pretty expansive lot, a 35,000 square foot lot, even though it's fairly close to the center of the city. Let's see, a 35,000 square foot lot, and there's about 43,000 square feet in an acre, so that's about 80% of an entire acre owned that close to Midtown. Well, I'm an investor. I mean, there's really no pride of ownership or boasting to people that I own a really big lot that close to Midtown. That doesn't matter. It's about the income. I'm not using the lot for my own personal enjoyment, okay? Well, I wonder if you can identify why this huge lot would actually be a negative for an income property investor. While you're thinking about that, I'll just describe the lot to you a little bit. It's grassy, it's treed, and it kind of gives the tenants a feeling of privacy and space that you wouldn't usually get in a multifamily building. But just the way the building is almost centered on the lot and the way that the trees are spaced around, that lot just isn't all that convenient for other uses. I don't know if you figured out why I consider this large lot to be more of a negative than a positive in this transaction. Do you have any idea? It's because I have a property tax obligation on all that land, yet the land doesn't contribute much, if anything at all, to the income of the property. All right, now maybe, just maybe, that feeling of spaciousness is attractive to an incoming tenant, meaning I have less vacancy between tenancies. Maybe I'm getting an extra only $25 per month for each unit because Families like that feeling. That's just a little bit more private, but that's hard to measure, and it's certainly not worth the tax obligation on the land. So that extra land is actually a negative, a drag on that 1.24% RV ratio. I mean, obviously that wasn't a deal killer. It's just one of a bunch of considerations, okay? Again, that RV ratio is just a guide. Really, getting beyond the guide, the bottom line and where all these little positive, negative adjustments get balanced out, is to answer the question, what is all of the projected income minus all the property's expenses, and does it come out to a positive or a negative number? And it came out to a positive $1,500 to $1,600 per month for me. And that's passive cash flow, okay? Meaning that includes the expense monthly for my excellent local property manager. And my property manager and I really like each other, by the way. He gives me a management fee so low that he made me promise not to disclose to anyone how low the rate is. And I've honored that. I haven't even told my wife what the management fee is. He gave me such a low rate because he says he learns from me, which is an amazing thing for him to say since he's 60 years old. He's been in business since the 70s. He owns one of the largest real estate brokerages in the state. He owns his own insurance agency. He owns his own property management company that I use. So it would actually be hard to believe that he learns from me. So getting back to the 8plex, at this conservatively calculated cash-on-cash return of 10 to 11% going in, I knew that it wasn't going to be the best performer in my portfolio, but it was going to be a worthy buy. So it appeared as an asset to me. Additionally, I went into this buy with the upside of thinking maybe, only a maybe now, I can repurpose that spacious, almost an acre lot into something else that would produce income, but that would just kind of be a sweetener on the deal. But those sweeteners on the deal have just not worked out since I bought this a little over 2 years ago, and I really didn't think they would because the seller of the building was a longtime experienced real estate agent. He would have known. So I've since found out I cannot subdivide the lot and sell part of it to a builder. I cannot put up a drive-up coffee shack over there on the westernmost portion of the lot adjacent to that 5-lane arterial road over there due to zoning. If I could have, then I would have had another income by charging a monthly lease fee to the coffee shack owner. I looked into a cell phone tower to put near the back of the lot where if you would see it, I mean, that would be a great tenant that might have paid me another $1,100 per month for the lease to the cell tower company, but that didn't work either. Hey, and I regularly find investors that dream about leasing part of their land to a cell tower. And it doesn't have to be a big eyesore depending on how it's done. A cell tower doesn't take up much of a footprint. A cell tower's quiet. It doesn't have faucets that need to be fixed. It doesn't make noise. A cell tower doesn't go vacant for a month until the next tenant moves in, typically, okay? So a cell tower's low maintenance income, which is nice. But, you probably should never count on that. Cellular tower providers space their towers very logically and logistically based on geography and other factors. So your site could be desirable for a cell tower, but likely it isn't, and mine wasn't either. So we've established that the large lot is actually mostly a negative investor-wise due to those property taxes on pretty much a non-income producing portion. Now, one positive about this property is that it is what I would describe as a C-class property in a B- or a B area. I'll probably do an entire show on classes of property sometime, but Class A property, that's like the newest, nicest, and it has the better amenities. Class D, that's at the bottom. That's the worst, like in a war zone, okay? So being a Class C property in a B- or B area, that's a desirable thing. Yeah, I mean, that means that the surrounding neighborhood is nicer in character than my 8plex building. That's attractive. Again, as investors, we want to begin with the end in mind. When I sell the building down the road, I'll never know who my buyer is or what their motivations are. Well, if a prospective buyer wants to rehab my older building and even make it upscale housing or corporate housing, that higher use could fit into that neighborhood better than if the surrounding housing were Class C or a Class D war zone. If that surrounding property were a Class D war zone, I mean, no one would want to fix my building up because an owner would know that they couldn't attract higher-end clientele to a nice renovated building if it were surrounded by blight. So that's a positive to me. I'm surrounded in the immediate area by a better neighborhood. So as you're listening to me describe this, you can kind of begin to see why the number one answer to a lot of real estate investing questions is it depends, okay? Oftentimes, it's just not a yes or no answer. So the RV ratio, that's just a number on the surface, and we need to scratch below the surface every time because every piece of real estate's different. Even two pieces of real estate that look the same and are right next to each other. It's kind of like every property is its own uniquely shaped jigsaw puzzle piece. Now, perhaps the biggest obstacle that I had in purchasing the eightplex centered on the water well. And keep in mind, as I tell you about the water well, that I had to close on this eightplex to avoid paying a steep tax and keep the 1031 exchange intact. There are a few ways to identify properties to buy in an exchange, and I chose the option to pick 3 properties. I had to close on 2 of the 3 chosen properties without taking this mega tax hit, and of the 3 properties I identified, 2 were in Anchorage, Alaska, 1 was in San Antonio, Texas. The San Antonio prospect went away after I identified it because it was a new construction building and a permitting issue meant that it wouldn't be built in time for me to use it in the exchange. So I had to close on this eightplex. Once I knew that I wanted the building, I paid a building inspector to walk all the units, just like I do with every building or even a turnkey single-family home that I make a purchase on. Always do that, okay? And the seller went ahead and fixed the inspector's findings as usual in this building, okay? Now later, during the appraisal of the eightplex, the financing company, the one I was doing the loan with, their rep visited the building, and only at that time did he find out the property was on a water well. Now, previously, I didn't think that the presence of a functional, operating water well supply for the 8 families was any kind of red flag. But it turned out the financing company said that before a building changes ownership, before I could buy it, the seller needed to prove to the municipality that it's just not economically feasible to hook up the building's water supply to the municipal source. And then secondly, if you can jump that hurdle and first prove it's not feasible to hook up the water well to the source and the well stays in place, then the seller would need to have the water well tested to prove that the water is potable, safe to drink. Well, I'm thinking, okay, that second one of checking the water quality is probably pretty important. And one other preeminent thought for sure is this is only going to delay my closing on the building. So my money is sitting over there dead at the 1031 exchange company longer, not being used, not leveraging anything, and not providing me with any return. While that was happening, the seller had an excavating company, a dirt digger, write a letter showing that it would cost $70,000 or whatever that figure was to show that it was not economically feasible to dig a water supply line from the main over to this eightplex. All right, well, that's great for now, but you know what? This might diminish my liquidity of the property down the road because I'm going to have to go prove the same thing to the municipality again when I go sell the property, all right? So again, I'm thinking about beginning with the end in mind. So with that hurdle of the 2 cleared, now the seller just has to have a water sample professionally collected from the building's well. And this well that had been operating on the property since the building was constructed in 1964, okay, it's been operating a long time. So both I and the financing company are waiting a few days for the water quality results to come back from the testing laboratory, all while my money is sitting rotting at the exchange company with really potentially the ownership of an eightplex building or not owning it hanging in the balance, kind of hinging on the results of a third-party laboratory's water quality analysis, checking how many parts per million of certain contaminants, if any, were in the building's drinking water. Well, a few days later, I got a call from Paul, my mortgage guy at the financing company. The water quality test results were back from the lab, and right then and there on the phone, I learned this news. There was such a high presence of arsenic in the well water that I could not buy the building in that condition, and I could not identify another building in the exchange. Well, that was too bad, but don't feel bad about me. I'm an investor that has their 1031 exchange sunk and is about to take a 5-figure tax hit. Don't feel bad about me because consider this. Long-term exposure to arsenic has been linked to causing cancer in humans, and now we've learned that there are 8 families, including their children, drinking that arsenic-contaminated water for years. Well, who is going to tell them, and how exactly does one tell them this? Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe this. I'll let you know how we handled the fact that 8 families had been drinking arsenic-contaminated water for years. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Through Get Rich Education and International Coffee Farms, you can own your own half-acre parcels of a passive income-generating coffee farm in Panama for as little as $12,000. It's a low-risk opportunity with an average annual return projected to be 13 to 15%. The farms are professionally managed for you on a turnkey basis, and you own the land. And you can give as well as receive by helping International Coffee Farms create good jobs that pay a living wage and provide medical, pension, and other benefits to very poor Panamanian coffee farm workers and their families, often for the first time in their lives.
Hi, this is Tom Hopkins, and I can't tell you how smart you are to be with Get Rich Education and make these ideas you.
Hey, you know, International Coffee Farms treats people right. When I invested with the co-founders, David and Darren, and I sent in the payment for my coffee farm parcels last year, then pumped my fist on making such a great investment. And, then I soon settled on to doing the next thing in life. Well, a couple days later, Darren let me know that I had inadvertently made an overpayment for my coffee farm purchases, and he sent back a significant sum of money to me. I mean, those are the type of people we're dealing with here, and David and Darren handle your buys just like they did mine. I mean, I love that investment, treating investors well and providing them with cash flow, improving the lives of hardworking, poor Panamanian coffee farmers, and having an asset uncorrelated to U.S. residential real estate in a specialty coffee market with rapid year-over-year growth and being such a cool thing to invest in. And now they're offering a $1,000 per parcel discount just for GRE listeners. That's the most generous thing a guest has ever done for you. So you can listen to GRE episode 28 for my full feature interview with International Coffee Farms founder David Sewell. Hey, and some even better news, the $1,000 per parcel discount just for GR listeners that send their contact details to coffee@getricheducation.com goes through July 31st. There are details in today's show notes. Hey, and I'll let you know later when the group coffee tour dates are announced, and I hope to see you there because I'll be there too on the tour with my wife in Panama. Okay, well, far from the verdant, lush coffee plantations in Central America, I was under contract to buy an 8-plex in a 1031 exchange, and arsenic was just discovered in the water well supplying the building. And it's pretty fun to talk my leverage and arbitrage talk and chat with a renowned global economist like Richard Duncan here on this show about quantitative easing and world monetary policy and all that, but it's time to walk the walk. This clean water supply issue for 8 families is some real-life boots-on-the-ground stuff. It was easy to consider quitting my Daydream for a minute there, okay? This contaminated water well has got to be addressed right away. I mean, part of my mission is to be responsible. Remember, provide housing that's clean, safe, affordable, and functional. Never get called a slumlord, okay? Potable water, that's 3 of the 4 right there. That's clean, safe, and functional. Well, the seller, whom must have been totally embarrassed that his water failed, he launched into action. He bought a pretty pricey water well filtration system, had it installed, and then had the now filtered well water retested, and then it did test within acceptable levels for completely clean, potable water, and we were off to closing after a long delay. But you know the weird thing? To this day here, more than 2 years later, I still don't know, and I'll probably never know, if the families in that eightplex ever learned about the high arsenic levels in the water that they had been drinking for years. I mean, it sure was not my place to try to tell them. You know, when the results came back, I was still weeks from owning the building, and there was no guarantee I would ever own it. It was squarely up to the building owner, the responsible party for that condition, to tell the residents. And then after I close, what am I going to do? I mean, I'm not going to go around and knock on all 8 doors and tell those families that the former owner didn't look after the water quality. I mean, it was up to him to tell them. You know, what I can do going forward is make sure that the manager sees that that water is regularly tested, which is still less expensive to me than paying a monthly municipal water bill. But you know what? I'm going to guess that that former owner never told the residents. So, you know, that's probably the most anxiety-inducing situation I've ever had in 13 years of doing income property. But, you know, that stuff can happen. Obviously, it just did. So 1031 exchanges, they do have timelines and tension, but they're an amazing wealth producer. That was more than 2 years ago. Let's just move along the timeline to a couple months ago, when I made that first visit to that building in 4 or 5 months. I had a reason to go over there because I wanted to check out the sewer drain pipe, which the manager had just told me was leaking at 2 places. Now, of all the unpleasant maintenance issues, a sewer drain pipe with just these little small dripping leaks, like at 2 places where there were joints in the pipes, I mean, that's not very nice to see. So what my manager did, he got maintenance quotes from 3 companies for me. And then with the one quote of the 3 that I chose, he set up an appointment with the owner of that plumbing company so that owner could explain what his company was going to do for me. He met me over at the building. I just figured I was going to go get more familiar with this problem firsthand, even though my manager could have handled it. Well, that ended up being a $3,500 fix for me so that they could replace and I guess weld in some new pieces of replacement pipe is what they did there. And, you know, there are a lot of maintenance and improvements that can be made over the life of an eightplex building, but the real downer about sewer drain line maintenance is this. You know, both the tenants and later when I sell the building to that next buyer down the road, well, everyone already expects a sewer drain to work. You know, I guess what I'm getting at is that repairing this added 0 value to my building. Now, if instead I would have used that money toward repaving the driveway or paying a few thousand to repaint the building exterior or something, well, at least that would have added to the curb appeal. I mean, even if instead I would have paid thousands to buy a new, more efficient HVAC system, I mean, even though that would have nothing to do with curb appeal, I mean, that probably would have increased my cash flow by having lower energy bills. With some buildings, even replacing the roof or adding new windows could add to the curb appeal or the energy efficiency, depending on the nature of the building. But replacing a leaking sewer drain pipe and replacing a few sections, I mean, that adds nothing for nobody. That's just expected to work. So that's why I say it's really one of the more disappointing fixes that I could have had to make on this eightplex, but it had to be done. And hey, remember now, for a lot of major repair expenses, you do have a property insurance policy typically that can pay for that work too. It just wasn't eligible in this case. So, you know, I probably had more trouble with this eightplex over 2+ years than I have with any other property, but still, I mean, when I look at the results, all in all, with minimal involvement on my part, and inside this geographic market with housing demand that exceeds supply and a great property manager that makes my life easy, here's the result. I've had some really nice appreciation. A $760,000 appraisal or purchase up to $825K today. That's a $65,000 gain in 2 years on this property. So remember, my down payment was $152K. So that's a 43% gain over a 2-year period, thanks to being leveraged, all right? 65K divided by 152K is 43%. Well, a Dave Ramsey disciple wouldn't have done that. Had one paid all cash for the property and not used debt, that would have been an 8.6% gain over 2 years, okay? 65K divided by the entire 760K. So we had a 43% gain using a loan versus an 8.6% gain. Yeah, that's the leverage difference. Now let's factor in inflation. At 5% inflation, that's a 38% inflation-adjusted gain with leverage alone versus only a 3.6% all-cash gain without the leverage. 38% versus 3.6%. So I made out better by a magnitude of 10 because I employ smart debt. Okay? So that's avoiding debt-free in favor of being financially free. Plus, I've been getting monthly cash flow and principal paydown for 25 months now, which isn't even included in that 43% gain over 2 years. Okay, this is why I'm in real estate. This is why I want you to consider being in real estate, all right? On today's show, as a real estate investor with 13 years of experience here, I guess I'll wrap it up. I just thought it could help you if you can see how I look at a property with an investor's eyes before I go in and buy it. And then I really wanted you to hear about some real problems and what they look like, and also to see what the outcome is and see what my returns are. So even though I do use a professional property manager, sometimes I get down in the weeds a little bit and get involved, all right? So, I guess this is really sort of a case study in one of my own properties for you here. I'm going to do this again for you down the road when I do a future show that's all about fourplexes. I look forward to doing that fourplex show for you sometime. I'll tell you all about why a fourplex is so special at launching you into wealth faster than anything else I know. And I'll tell you what my early days of landlording were like in that owner-occupied fourplex that I started out with. Basically some good news here is that your return on time invested, your ROTI, that increases with each successive deal that you do. And with more experience, you're going to increasingly view property through an investor lens. And that's whether you're looking at things with your own eyes or whether you're buying a remote turnkey property and you lean on the property inspector's findings some more. But I'm going to guess that the next time you buy an apartment building, one of your first questions is going to be, is this building's water hooked up to a well by chance? I bet you're going to want to know about that. Hey, next week I've got a great guest on the show. It's going to be a special real estate investing teacher whom I've learned quite a bit from. Hey, you know what? Before I go, I've got to tell you, right now it is 10:40 p.m., quite a bit later than I usually stay up, and it is still light outside here in beautiful and pristine Anchorage, Alaska. It's not dusky or anything at all. In fact, the sun is shining a little bit, and if I walked outside, I bet my body would cast a shadow. I can see a tree leaving a shadow out there. Sunset is at 11:29 p.m. So I just had to mention that. I've lived here 16 years since moving out from Pennsylvania, and I'm still getting used to this. And hey, one more thing. I'd like to ask you for something, and I don't ask for much. If I've ever done anything to create value for you on this show, I would be really grateful if you left a review for the show on iTunes or elsewhere. That way the show can rank higher and help more people. The review is up to you, but I'd be really grateful. Either way, I'm thankful for you investing your time with me today. Now go out there and don't quit your daydream.
You've been listening to Get Rich Education, telling you what the wealthy won't tell you about real estate and investing. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to visit iTunes and leave your comments.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.